Hi, it's Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Tiny House Summit. Chris Galusha is here. He's president of the American Tiny House Association. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
So glad you could do this. Love the background. Tell us about it.
This is my home that I'm working on here in Weatherford, Texas. It's a small home built in the 1960s. It originally started about 600 square feet, and then at some point somebody took the carport and turned it into some living space. And so it's about 1,000 square feet, but I've completely gutted it, and I'm rearranging it and using a lot of tiny home concepts in it as I rebuild it into a 3-bedroom, 1-bath home with a big open floor plan. So.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the American Tiny House Association and your involvement.
So the American Tiny House Association was started in 2015 by a group of folks led by Lane Walker out of Florida to provide to have an organization to help people maneuver zones and codes and ordinances and stuff, and to help them open up that dialogue with their local officials, and to help them navigate, all the laws and regulations around tiny homes. So, and then I got involved about mid 2016, off and on. I did a few projects, worked on a few things with Elaine, and then last year they asked me to step up to vice president, and then this past fall they thought I had a good vision, so they elected me president. So
nice. That's a compliment.
It sure is, and we've got a lot of stuff going on this year. We just made a big change to our state chapter leaders and our website and stuff, and we're fixing to get started on a redesign of the website and some other stuff. So we've got some good stuff going on.
Okay, so you're going to talk today about inspections, appraisals, and certifications. Before we get there, how did you, what was your entry point into the tiny house movement?
My entry, I've been a builder since the early 90s. I've been a carpenter, and I've studied all facets of residential construction. And I originally started working with my grandfather when I was in high school. And he built some smaller homes, and I didn't come from a very affluent family. When I decided to go out on my own, I decided my focus from back in the 90s wanted to be smaller, more affordable homes. It's always seemed to me like there's bigger, more expensive homes, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think everybody has a right to live in whatever type of home they feel most comfortable in, or that they want to spend their money on. But it's always seemed to me that finding safe, affordable, well-built housing on the smaller side or the more affordable side was always hard to come by. So that's always been my focus. And in 2010, I went through some life changes, and I found myself in the little piece of property that I still to this day own and call the Hut, a little 15 by 18 building that I lived in while I went to college after an on-the-job injury. So that, besides having lived for several years in an RV as a catastrophe insurance adjuster before that, I guess that was probably my biggest entry into the tiny home realm. So,
and the association, is it particularly for people who are building tiny houses on wheels, or is it just small scale living?
It's for anybody who needs some sort of assistance. We have people that answer questions about construction, whether it's about building a tiny house on wheels or a tiny house on a foundation. We try to help people that are trying to navigate their city council, to try and get tiny homes accepted for use as accessory dwelling units, or to be placed on lots by themselves in cities. So we try and help pretty much anybody who, wants to live smaller and needs some help navigating that in some form or fashion.
Yeah, one of the interesting themes from the summit as a whole has been kind of this understanding that while tiny houses on wheels have drawn attention to small living circumstances,
Mhm.
small houses have existed forever.
Yeah, that's the joke I make with people a lot. Is when I was a kid, we used to call them cabins, and trailer homes, and now we call them tiny houses. And it really doesn't matter what the terminology you use is. I mean, it's always kind of been the same focus. Some people are wanting to just downsize and make more options available for experiences and spend less on housing. Or a lot of times there's a lot of people that find themselves in a situation where they need the most affordable housing they can come up with. So there's a lot of different reasons to live tiny.
Yeah, it's really been fun to kind of explore the variety of ways in which people make those choices to go smaller. Everything from the uh, bus hostel, let's be nomads in Europe, right, to the homesteader in Tennessee. What before we get to the inspections, appraisals, and certifications, are there really common questions that come to the association? Is there a way to sort of identify what the most pressing issues are for people?
Um, I'm Because I'm the president, I get all the mail that comes into the executive director's box. The most common questions I see are, um, where can I put a tiny home? Where can I buy a tiny home? And how can I talk to the people in my city because I want a tiny home? So those are pretty much the three most common questions. And because of the way we're structured, I funnel a lot of those out to our state chapter leaders because so many of those questions have to be answered at a local level. I can't hear. I'm in the Dallas Fort Worth area. I have no clue, what the situation is in Lawrence, Kansas, as far as is the council, is the city set up for tiny homes? What ordinances do they have and stuff like that? And so, so we try and help by having those state chapter leaders out there.
Okay, so let's dive in. What's a third party?
Well, let me take a step back before we get to what is a third party, and let me give you a little background on what's driving, my choice of topics. Recently, this past fall, we had the International Code Council, which is the organization that writes most of our building codes in America. The International Residential Code for 1 and 2 family dwellings is the one that most people building a tiny house on a foundation are going to use. And that organization adopted an addendum that's coming with the 2018 edition of that, specifically for tiny homes, talking about some changes to some sizes and some allowances and stuff. And then we've also seen, in the past year, we've started to see some companies really wanting to get into financing or insuring tiny homes on wheels, which have kind of existed in this gray area between are they an RV or are they just a house sitting on a trailer or what they are. So I wanted to do this talk, bringing in my experience from being a catastrophe insurance adjuster, and being an all lines adjuster, which basically means I can adjust anything and everything when I was licensed. And a lot of times we see these third parties and we deal with them, especially in real estate a lot, or insurance or finance, and we don't really understand why they're there. And then I've seen, and having some third parties inspections, appraisals, and certifications, I expected for several years to start seeing these companies pop up, and they are. And some of them are getting some flack, and I think it's because people don't understand what their purpose is in the marketplace and why they're so important. So in whether it's real estate or automobiles or jewelry, third parties are used a lot because they the definition of a third party legally is it's an independent party that has zero stake in the outcome of whatever the transaction is that's going on. Then that transaction could be the purchase of a piece of property, whether a property is built properly and can be situated in a city, in the case of a tiny home, or in the case of, I've seen these a lot in appraisals for vehicles. And so the third party is hired because they're impartial. It doesn't matter to them what way it goes, whether they authenticate that whatever they are that they're inspecting or appraising, they don't care what the value of it is. It makes no difference to them. And I have a good example that I dug up just for fun, because I like the 69 Camaro. So for instance, if I had a 69 Camaro that I was looking at purchasing, in 1969, there were about 240 something thousand Camaros manufactured. And they had several different trim plans. And the most exciting trim plan that most people don't even know about is one called the ZL1. It was a special factory ordered Camaro, and they made 69 of them. And if somebody were advertising one of those, in 1969, that car sold for about $7,300, $7,300. In 2012, one of the few remaining of those vehicles sold for $500,000. Today, the estimated price would be somewhere close to $1 million. So if somebody was advertising one of those and I had the money to purchase it, I really would need to make sure that I'm getting what I paid for. And that's where third-party inspectors, would show up. I would hire a vehicle appraiser to go out and look at the vehicle. I'm going to pay that person a flat fee. He doesn't care what way it goes. Whether I buy the vehicle or not and I cut a deal with the owner, it doesn't matter to him. But his job is extremely important to maintain the integrity and value of the other ZL1s that are still in existence. His job is to go out there and make sure that the engine and block, transmission all match the VIN of the vehicle. He's going to look and see, has this vehicle been repaired? Has it been wrecked? How many times has it been restored? He's going to check the paperwork on it. So that's all very important. And the way this ties in with tiny houses is we've started to see some companies popping up that are third-party companies. They're collecting some money, usually a flat fee from people, to start to make sure that the homes that people are building, because the tiny home community tends to be very do-it-yourself. There's a lot of people out there building their own homes. And because they're small homes, it's an affordable business to get into as far as becoming a tiny home builder for a livelihood. So these third-party inspectors have started to pop up, and there's a few that some people have probably heard of: Pacific West Associates, the National Organization for Alternative Housing, or NOAA. But they're not the only ones out there that can inspect stuff, or that you would deal with in any sort of real estate transaction. Most people hire a licensed home inspector anytime they buy a used home. Some people even hire one when they buy a new home. And that person is paid a flat fee, and their job is just to go through and make sure the water comes out of all the faucets, make sure all the outlets work, make sure the air conditioner is as new as the sellers are claiming it is. So these third-party companies that are coming out, I've seen a few of them get a little slack, that they're not legitimate or whatever it is, but they're important, and they start to become even more important as now we have some insurance companies that are actually requiring some sort of appraisal on the house as to whether it's built the way the owner claims it was built, whether it's built to code, and if it's built with the materials they say it's built with. And we're also starting to see some cities come online and say, yes, we'll allow some tiny homes in our city, but you have to have some sort of certification, some sort of third party that shows they inspected this while it was under construction, and then it's built to the standards that we expect it to be built to.
So why is this controversial?
I think it's controversial because, one, people don't really understand what is going on as far as third parties, and they deal with third parties so often that they really just, they kind of miss them. You know, they're just, it's part of normal business. And now that it's kind of showing up in the tiny home realm, people just weren't anticipating it, I guess. And so when somebody comes out and starts collecting money for something, you know, people obviously are skeptical. And it's good to be skeptical. I mean, there can be times when people are trying to take you for a ride. But these companies that we've seen show up, they're just like any of our other subject matter experts. You know, when I deal with foundation inspections that I do, because I have a degree in soil science, I'm seen as a subject matter expert. And a lot of real estate agents, you know, take what I have to say about what I see on a home, and they use that to help their buyers or sellers make an informed decision. And that's really all these third parties that we have coming up. And I expect to see more, you know, as cities and stuff come online. Foremost insurance company now requires an inspection and certification from either one of these or any of a number of other companies to say, this is how the home was built, and we are standing behind that. This is the way it was built, and it meets your standards.
So one of the arguments I've heard that's come up has been that these organizations don't provide liability coverage, meaning that if something goes wrong or the inspection wasn't accurate, it isn't sort of somebody that is ultimately financially on the hook. How does that play into this?
Well, that's based on a misunderstanding. These companies that are doing these inspections, whether it's a licensed electrician or the other companies that are certifying that these tiny homes are built to a certain standard, those companies they absolutely have to maintain a type of insurance called errors and omissions insurance. And it'll have a cap on it, whether it's $1 million policy or $10,000 policy or whatever it is. But that's your third party liability if they made a mistake. If they made a mistake and you can prove for some sort of reason that inspection was incorrect or something, then that's where that third party liability lies. I've dealt with this myself as an insurance adjuster on a house fire. You know, an electrician that built the home is supposed to be a subject matter expert. It was inspected by a licensed real estate inspector. The licensed real estate inspector missed something that was very obvious, and it ended up being one of the causes of the fire. And I don't know, I didn't work in that department for the insurance carrier, but I believe, you know, they at least attempted to go after that that inspection company's errors and omissions insurance to cover at least part of the cost of the loss.
So if there weren't a third party, who would do it?
Well, if there weren't these third-party companies that have specifically come into the marketplace for this purpose, there's licensed professionals that states and banks and financial institutions like insurance companies and cities have relied on in the past. A lot of times for appraisals on some sort of structure, you hire a licensed engineer. That's why engineers are licensed by the states that they are licensed to conduct business in. You'll find in almost, I believe, all 50 states, your electricians and plumbers and air conditioning guys, contractors, they all have a state issued license. So any one of those folks could look at least their area. You know, a licensed electrician, if he's willing to put his name and license number down on a piece of paper to say, I inspected this home while it was under construction. Everything in here was installed according to whatever code or ordinances, then that would be a report that a city or a financial institution might consider as meeting their requirement to show that, you know, the home is built as they expect it to be.
Okay, so let's say I own a manufacturing plant and I'm producing tiny houses.
Okay.
and or I'm producing products that match certain code requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have somebody come out and I certify that this house is up to code.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Who is it that comes and does that certification? Is it a government official?
But it just depends where you're at. Sometimes states will have a department that come and certify that. If you're building to well, that's a great example, Steve, because in the modular home industry and the manufactured home industry, that entire industry has two groups that deal with any type of home manufactured in factory. There's a third party design review agencies, and those companies review your designs, plans, and specifications for a home before you even start building it to make sure that what you plan to build would meet code. And then there's third party inspection agencies that actually come out to your factory as you're building these homes to make sure that not only are you building to the plans and specifications you submitted, but you're also building to not cutting any corners, and you're building to the codes that are applicable for the type of structure you're building.
Okay, so I'm trying to piece this together because it's pretty new to me.
Yeah.
But it seems like I'm a builder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm manufacturing units to specific codes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And maybe I have two concerns. One is if there isn't a set of codes related to a specific tiny house,
Mm-hmm.
and then whatever gets inspected may not actually necessarily be safe. But so maybe I just have a sort of a deeper altruistic desire to make sure that things are safe. Am I also kind of concerned that I'm investing a lot of money in a process and someone else isn't having to go through the same process? Is there a feeling that it isn't necessarily equitable?
Well, as far as building safe homes, that's the largest concern of any official in the public space. I mean, our building code officials and zoning officials, that's their primary charge, is to make sure that the homes that go into their communities are safe, not only for the people living in them, but the ones that are around them. And you know what the tiny home movement is doing, starting to have these inspection companies and stuff voluntarily before a state or the government has to step in, is a similar path that a related industry, the RV industry, underwent decades ago. Before the states and federal government stepped in and said, this is how you're going to build an RV, many of those builders and stuff of RVs got together and said, we need to come up with a way to build these homes that's safe. And we're going to write these down, and then we're going to start to train individuals to inspect the construction of these homes and these factories to make sure that the members of our organization are all building to the same requirement. Now, even with the RV industry, you have people that are building stuff in their garages on their own, or will start a company and choose not to be a part of the RVIA trade organization and voluntarily submit to all of those inspections. And that's just something that's just going to happen. But what will happen by and large as the market moves forward and we see more requirements from insurance companies and cities and financial institutions to see some sort of third-party certification on these properties, is the percentage of people trying to do stuff on the side on their own without seeking some sort of verification of the process and the safety of these homes, we'll see that percentage decline to where you just have the few fringe people that are doing it just because they don't want to play by the rules.
Okay, so let's ask the really hard question.
Okay.
So, how many actual people do you think live in a tiny house on wheels?
Oh, geez, Steve, that's a question I get asked about 5 times a week via email, and I have no clue. Right now, nobody. I mean, there's really no way to actually know. You're not actually going to be able to pin everybody down that lives in a tiny home on wheels and figure it out.
So let's make an argument.
Okay.
So Darren Zaruba says it's somewhere between 5 and 10,000, his best estimate. So let's say that's true. So is it possible that what tiny houses have done is to create this really intriguing interest in small scale living, but that's actually going to translate into more people building small homes on foundations than it is going to translate into people building tiny houses on wheels?
That's probably a very good prediction, Steve. I mean, if you go back 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, 10 years even, or more, when Jay Schaefer, who's one of the pioneers, when he built his first tiny home on wheels, and the people that's, were also pioneering after that. One of the main reasons they built their tiny home on wheels was because our local codes and zoning were not compatible with the lifestyle they wanted to live. And as we're starting to see cities and stuff make some changes, Fresno now allows tiny homes as accessory dwelling units. And people start to understand stuff. I mean, when I moved to Weatherford last year, I hadn't done any research, on how tiny home friendly it is. And I just happened to be down at the zoning department for pulling permits on the home that I'm actually remodeling. And I thought I just asked a few questions. It was very interesting, doing a little research and talking to the city planner. Weatherford, Texas is actually very tiny home friendly. I mean, they go with the 2012 International Building Code. You can build a home practically as small as about 250 square feet under that code. I did find an interesting ordinance here. So it doesn't matter what size home you build in Weatherford, Texas, to reduce the congestion on the streets with parking. Even if I built a home that was 250 square feet, I still have to build enclosed parking for 2 vehicles. So I can have a tiny home, but I'm going to have to have a 2-car garage that's bigger than my house. But when I talked to the city planner, he was very open to a lot of options. I said, so I could just build a 2-car garage and just put my living quarters above. And he was like, well, certainly, we don't have any problem with that. That gets you about a 400 square foot home. That's pretty tiny. And I had to agree with him. Yeah, that's a pretty tiny home, 400 square feet. So, so I think as people do more research and as the American Tiny House Association teaches people and helps people learn to talk with their city officials and stuff, that I think we're going to find out that there's a whole lot of tiny home friendly towns in America that people just didn't even realize. Another thing I pointed out to some people is that even though you have 1,000 square foot minimum on a lot of places I've seen, usually those areas allow you to build a single home or a duplex. So in a lot of these places, you can actually build 2 500 square foot homes. As long as they're connected, then you built a tiny home duplex. So those are options too. We got to teach people. That's another thing I do, is teach people to think a little bit outside of the box.
Okay, so again, you're teaching me. If the third-party inspections are really important for tiny houses on wheels, right? Because the ability for somebody to actually look at the construction and the build and say, this is to a certain standard level, maybe for insurance or whatever. How important is it to someone who's just trying to build small? Meaning, what are the existing options for the kind of inspections and code compliance for someone building small? And where would a third party help or not for that person?
Well, if you're building a small home on a foundation and you're inside a city, the city is going to provide that service. You're going to have your building inspectors that inspect it along the way, and there's going to be requirements to use certain licensed contractors in nearly every city I've ever been involved in construction in. Your electricians, plumbers, and air conditioning contractors all have to be licensed. And in other than just rare cases or minor replacement by homeowners, those folks are going to help and work with the city code officials to make sure the home's built properly. As far as tiny homes on wheels, I mean, the first thing you have to do is pick, what standard you're going to use. Whether if it's the RV standard, then there's third-party inspection agencies for the RV industry out there to help even a DIY person, build or remodel something on a trailer to those specifications. And then if I'm building a home out in the country where there is no inspection agency, no code compliance department, you can engage professionals in the different areas. Hiring a licensed electrician, plumber, and air conditioning contractor are going to get you, a licensed professional that should be building. Part of their agreement to be licensed is to build to the state's, required code. And those are kind of the three areas where insurance-wise you see a lot of mistakes that can cause the loss of a home. Outlets wired incorrectly, can cause the house to burn down. Plumbing not put together correctly can very quickly introduce moisture into a home or sewage into a home that causes health hazards. So as far as like the actual physical construction, I mean, you can get the assistance of a licensed, structural engineer. You could use the services of a certified code official. The International Code Council has hundreds of folks, probably even thousands of folks across the United States that have taken their test to become certified code officials, which means as an expert, you can engage the services of those folks to come out and assist you with the construction of your home to make sure it's being built in compliance with whatever the applicable building code is for your area.
So I don't want to put words in Andrew Bennett's mouth, but I think I've heard him say, one of the benefits of these third-party systems is they actually check on the work being done by those who are certified. That just because somebody's certified doesn't necessarily mean they're doing a good job. So one of the benefits is you're kind of keeping tabs to make sure it is safe.
Exactly. And I had a nice conversation with Andrew when I was down in Florida for the Tiny Home Festival last year. And the system they use is actually very interesting. I mean, they do a video inspection and they do it all in one recording. If something happens to that recording in the middle, then they start all over, and it's not just looked at by the person doing on the other end of that recording with the individual building the home. He actually has a list of people that are licensed engineers, certified code officials, and licensed contractors that actually go through each one of those videos just to make sure that the inspector working for his company doesn't miss something. And that's about the best you can do, is have several eyes look at something, and try and catch as much as you can. I talked to Andrew. He was telling me the story about the house he built, the tiny house on wheels he built. He actually hired another company as the third-party inspector for his own personal homes that he was building. And he does this all the time. And as he was going through his first inspection, the inspector on the other end of the video said, "Hey, wait a minute, back up there. You missed something in the construction of this home." And he's going, "What? No, I didn't." And sure enough, he did. He had missed, I think it was a screw or some sort of fastener or plate to hold the walls down to the floor or something. But, I mean, that to me, that just helps, improve and keep the integrity in the system by having, when the inspectors voluntarily have different inspectors inspect their stuff and they're open to that correction. It keeps the integrity in the system. So.
Okay, so where do we go from here? Any conclusions to draw? Any kind of larger lessons for people who are watching who are now confused?
Well, my suggestion is you know, it's okay to be skeptical, but you know, don't try and be antagonistic towards people. And I see that sometimes, especially when stuff is new. People by and large don't like change, but you know, I encourage people to think about this a little bit. You know, reach out, ask questions. There's myself and many other professionals that have been in the building trades for a long time, and maybe even ask yourself, you know, where have I seen something similar to this in regular homes? You know, it's not unusual to have inspections all along the way of the construction of a regular home. It's not unusual when, I mean, if I buy a home that's 15 years old, the insurance company has a right to send an inspector out before they agree to insure my home. And they often do. They'll engage an independent insurance adjuster like I used to be, and they'll say, hey, run by this house, get up on the roof, take some pictures, look around, let us know, do you think this roof was replaced last year? Because that's what the homeowners, the buyers are claiming. Or, you know, how does the fence look? Does it look like it's only 5 years old? That's what they're claiming. How does the vinyl siding look? Does it look like it's 20 years old? So, you know, when you start seeing this stuff coming up, as far as third parties that are involved, you know, starting to get involved with the tiny home construction process, you know, try and ask yourself, you know, is this something that occurs with regular homes? You know, are regular homes inspected when they're built? Yes, they are. You know, and you know, what kind of companies do it? I mean, when people buy real estate in Texas, I mean, they almost probably 90% of the time, a real estate inspector is engaged to come out and look at that property, make sure it meets the claims of the sellers so that the buyers are aware. So.
Okay, let's shift gears for the finish here.
Okay.
What's the most exciting thing you're seeing happen with tiny houses and tiny living?
The most exciting things I see, I'm one for innovation. So the things I like seeing that's exciting to me are as people are expanding their box or the ideas for innovations in home automation, exterior and interior finishes. I'm starting to see more examples of people using tile and really prettying up the inside of their tiny homes. I love seeing when somebody comes out with kind of an interesting new way to take some otherwise unused space and turn it into storage. And we're starting to see some designs other than just a square box on a trailer, which is awesome. Zyle Vardos has some absolutely fantastically beautiful homes, as do some other folks that are out there. I've seen some that are Gothic arches, and those are really cool. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on out there.
Okay, and what's the biggest mistake you see people making in the tiny home world?
Oh, man. The biggest mistake I see people making most of the time is trying to build too cheaply. You can only cut the cost of building a tiny home down so far. And that causes people to make choices that, to me, seem unsafe. In the general construction of their homes that I see posted online, pictures and stuff. Some of them make me cringe. Sometimes I'll say some stuff, and sometimes I'm booed off the stage for doing it. But some of that stuff is going to change. But what I would tell people is you can only cut corners so far. You need how many ever studs you need to buy or sheets of plywood you need to buy to build a safe home that's going to last you for many, many, many years. That's what you're going to have to buy. It means you have to wait another paycheck to get started on your tiny home. Just wait the next paycheck before you get started. And people getting in a hurry. That's something I've had to learn over almost 30 years of construction, is getting in a hurry costs you more down the road. You make a mistake, and then you have to tear something out, rebuy the materials, and completely do it over again.
Okay, Chris, that was really helpful.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I'm glad.
Thanks for doing that. And thanks, folks, for watching. This is the Tiny House Summit. Chris Galusha, the the American Tiny House Association.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I'm happy to participate.
Yeah, a lot of fun. Thank you.
You're welcome.